Welcome. We are about to connect the dots on a really wild piece of history. We're going to follow a single thread from the thrones of old European empires, right through the trenches of World War I, and all the way to the birth of one of the most powerful and, let's face it, disruptive forces of the 20th century, the Soviet Union. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? How on earth could one single gunshot set off a chain reaction so massive that it completely redraws the world map and creates a superpower that would define the next 100 years? Well, let's find out. So, to get this, you first have to picture Europe back in the early 1900s. This was not a continent of friendly neighbors. No, no. It was more like a tense chessboard, with all these competing empires constantly trying to outmaneuver each other for power, for colonies, and for influence. Eventually, this rivalry basically split the entire continent into two armed teams. First, you had the Triple Alliance, formed back in 1882, which brought Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy together. And in response to that, another team formed up, the Triple Entente, linking France, Russia, and Great Britain. With Europe divided like this, the stage was absolutely set for a major conflict. But let's be clear, the Triple Entente wasn't some group of best buddies. Not at all. This was a classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. France was still bitter about a war it lost to Germany, and Britain was getting really nervous about Germany's huge new navy. This alliance was one of pure convenience, held together by just one thing, a shared fear of Germany and its allies. So, you've got these two massive, heavily armed alliances just nervously staring each other down across the continent. All it was going to take was one little spark to light the whole fuse. And that spark finally came in the summer of 1914. And just watch how fast the dominoes fall. On June 28th, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary is assassinated by a Serbian nationalist. A month later, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Now that triggers Russia's promise to protect Serbia, so it gets its army ready. Germany, seeing its ally threatened, declares war on Russia. And just like that, within weeks, a local dispute explodes into a continental war, all because that web of alliances dragged everybody in. And these two sides, well, they got bigger fast. The Triple Alliance became the heart of the Central Powers, roping in the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria. And the Triple Entente became the Allied powers, eventually bringing in global players like the USA. The conflict was no longer just European. The whole world was now at war. Now, a war of this big demands a staggering price from every single country involved. But for one of the Allied powers, the strain was just going to be too much. We're talking about a nation that was already cracking from the inside, Tsarist Russia. Okay, so this is the crucial part. Russia went into World War I looking like a giant, but it was a giant on very shaky ground. The empire was dealing with some huge internal problems long before the first shots of the war were even fired. I mean, think about it. The vast majority of people were peasants who had no real say in their own government. Then the country suffered this humiliating military defeat to Japan in 1905, which was a huge blow to national pride. And that same year, the Tsar's troops opened fire on peaceful protesters, which led to a massacre. Sure, it forced some minor reforms, but it left this deep, simmering anger. This place was a powder keg, just waiting to blow. And the brutal, grinding, endless meat grinder of World War I, that was the match. As Russia started to completely fall apart under the pressure of the war, a small but very determined group of radicals saw their moment. This was their chance to grab power. Now here's where the story takes this incredible, almost unbelievable turn. Russia's enemy, Germany, comes up with this truly ruthless plan. They knew about this radical revolutionary living in exile, a guy named Vladimir Lenin. Their idea? Secretly ship him back into Russia, hoping he'd basically be a human bomb, a catalyst for so much chaos that it would knock Russia right out of the war. It was a huge, massive gamble. And you know what? That gamble paid off for Germany, big time. By 1917, the war was going so badly that Tsar Nicholas II was forced to give up his throne. A weak, temporary government tried to take over, but it couldn't hang on. That's when Lenin and his Bolsheviks launched their coup, seized control, and immediately made good on their promise to Germany. They pulled Russia straight out of World War I. So who were these Bolsheviks anyway? Well, they were this highly disciplined group of radical socialists led by Lenin. And their goal wasn't just to change the government. No, they wanted to completely tear down the old Russian society and build something totally new from the ground up, based on their revolutionary ideas. And they got power by taking over these local workers' councils, called Soviets, that had popped up all over the country.
But Lenin's coup, that wasn't the end of the story. Oh no, it was just the beginning. Now that they had power, the Bolsheviks got to work transforming Russia into the world's first ever communist state, a move that would change everything globally.
So their guiding philosophy was communism, which is based on the ideas of a guy named Karl Marx. At its heart, it was a total rejection of private property. So instead of individuals owning things, the means of production, factories, land, businesses, would be owned by everyone, and the government would manage the economy for the people.
So after years of a really brutal civil war to lock down their power, the Bolsheviks, who were now officially called the Communist Party, were finally ready. In 1922, they made their control official by signing a treaty with neighboring republics like Ukraine and Belarus.
And with that treaty, the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, was officially born. Just think about that direct line. A web of imperial alliances causes a world war, that war causes the collapse of Russia, and that collapse allows for the rise of a communist superpower that would define world politics for the next 70 years. Wow.
Which leaves us with this final, just fascinating question. In making that desperate gamble to sneak Lenin back into Russia, did Imperial Germany, in its quest to win World War I, accidentally create the very superpower that would one day divide their own country and become the world's greatest ideological rival? It's just a stunning example of unintended consequences.